Elena's fingers traced the door frame where paint had once been white, but now peeled away like old skin. The wood beneath felt warm despite the October chill, and for a moment, just a heartbeat, she could have sworn she felt it pulse like a living thing. Her daughter kicked a sharp jab against her ribs, as if responding to whatever energy thrummed through the house's bones. "I know, little one," she whispered, one hand settling on her swollen belly. "You feel it too, don't you?" The rain drummed harder against what remained of the roof, finding every crack and crevice to exploit. Elena should have been terrified. Any rational person would flee from this skeletal remains of Victorian grandeur with its sagging porch and foundation that listed like a sinking ship. Instead, she stepped across the threshold. The moment her foot touched the warped floorboard, the house shuddered, not from wind or settling, from something deeper, more intentional. The sound of her own breathing seemed to echo in the empty spaces, joining a symphony of creaks and whispers that felt less like decay and more like awakening. Behind her, car doors slammed. Elena didn't need to turn to know it was the neighbors, drawn by morbid curiosity to witness the pregnant widow's descent into madness. She'd felt their stares during the auction 3 hours ago, heard their whispered theories about grief and poor judgment. Mrs. Chen from the grocery store had actually tried to intervene, pulling Elena aside to suggest grief counseling instead of real estate ventures. "Elena!" The voice belonged to Tom Bradley, Millbrook's self-appointed spokesman for common sense. His footsteps splashed through puddles as he approached. "Elena, you can't seriously be going in there. The structure's not sound. You could get hurt." She turned to face him through the open doorway, noting how he stopped well short of the porch steps. Behind him clustered a small group of locals, their faces arranged in expressions of concern that barely masked their judgment. Sarah Morrison clutched her umbrella like a weapon. Old Pete Kowalski shook his head with the satisfaction of someone whose dire predictions were coming true. "I appreciate your concern," Elena said, her librarian's voice carrying the authority she'd perfected during story time with particularly unruly children. "But I've made my decision." "With what money?" Pete called out, his voice carrying over the rain. "That husband of yours left you with nothing but debt from what I hear. You're throwing away money you don't have on a house that should have been torn down decades ago." The words hit like physical blows. Michael had died 6 weeks ago, a heart attack at 28 that no one saw coming, least of all the doctors who'd pronounced him perfectly healthy just months before. The medical bills had devoured their savings. The life insurance company was still investigating the claim. Elena's job at the library paid enough for groceries and rent, but barely, which made her $200 bid on this condemned wreck seem even more insane. "The foundation's cracked all to hell," Tom continued, taking a half step closer but still keeping his distance. "There's water damage, mold, probably asbestos. And that's just what we can see. God knows what's lurking in the walls." Elena's daughter kicked again, harder this time, and the house responded with another of those strange shudders. But this time, Elena noticed something else. The rain drumming on the roof had shifted in rhythm, becoming less chaotic and more musical, like the beginning of a lullaby she almost remembered. "The place has a history," Sarah Morrison added, her voice dropping to the tone people used for ghost stories. 3 deaths in 3 generations, Elena. Mary Fairweather hanged herself in the parlor in 1923. Her daughter Catherine died of consumption in the master bedroom in 1954, and Catherine's daughter Louise, well, she just disappeared one winter night in 1981. They never found her body. The gathered crowd murmured their agreement, nodding with the satisfaction of people sharing well-worn local folklore. Elena had heard the stories, had even researched them during her first weeks in Millbrook, back when she and Michael were house hunting, and this Victorian had caught her eye despite its obvious decay. "Stories," she said simply. "Stories have power," Pete countered. "This house has been dying for 40 years. Nothing good grows in soil that poisoned." Another kick from her daughter, another pulse from the house. Elena pressed her palm flat against the doorframe and felt that impossible warmth spread up her arm. The rain drumming overhead definitely sounded like music now, a gentle rhythm that seemed to sync with her heartbeat. "Maybe," Elena said, her eyes never leaving the concerned faces of her neighbors. "But sometimes the most poisoned soil grows the strongest flowers." She stepped fully inside the house and closed the door behind her, shutting out their protests and their fears. In the sudden quiet, broken only by rain and the settling of old wood, Elena pressed both hands to her belly and listened. The house was listening too. She could feel it in the walls, in the floors, in the very air around her, waiting. "Well," she whispered to her unborn daughter, and whatever presence dwelt within these walls. "I guess we're home." The silence lasted exactly 3 heartbeats before reality crashed back in. Elena stood in what had once been the front hall, rain dripping from her jacket onto floorboards that looked even worse in the dim light filtering through boarded windows. The magical pulse she'd felt from the doorframe was gone, leaving behind only the musty smell of decades-old decay and the distant sound of her neighbors' voices retreating to their cars. She fumbled for her phone's flashlight, the weak beam revealing water stains that bloomed across the walls like dark flowers. A mouse skittered somewhere in the shadows. Her daughter gave another kick, and this time Elena felt only the familiar ache in her ribs. No mystical connection, no house responding in kind. "What have I done?" The words escaped before she could stop them, echoing in the empty space. 24 hours later, Elena was asking herself the same question as she sat in the Millbrook Public Library's break room, mechanically eating a peanut butter sandwich while her co-workers pretended not to stare. The gossip mill had worked efficiently. Everyone knew about yesterday's auction, her inexplicable purchase, and her dramatic declaration to the gathered crowd. "Are you sure you're feeling all right?" Nancy Peters, the head librarian, settled into the chair across from her, with the careful movements of someone approaching a wild animal. "You've seemed distracted lately." Distracted. That was one word for it. Elena had been making mistakes, misfiling returns, forgetting to order new releases, zoning out during the children's story hour until little Tommy Morrison had to ask 3 times if she was going to turn the page. Yesterday, she'd caught herself reorganizing the same shelf of romance novels 4 times, unable to remember what she'd been trying to accomplish. "I'm fine," Elena said, though they both knew it was a lie. "Just tired." Nancy's expression softened with the particular brand of pity reserved for pregnant widows. "You know, there's no shame in taking some time off. Dr. Martinez said you should be reducing stress, not buying condemned houses." The intervention had been gentle but thorough. Dr. Martinez, Elena's obstetrician, had called Nancy after hearing about the auction from his wife, who'd heard it from Sarah Morrison. In a town of 3,000 people, secrets lasted about as long as morning frost. The doctor was concerned about Elena's decision-making patterns and her blood pressure. Nancy was concerned about Elena's work performance and the library's insurance liability. Everyone, it seemed, was concerned about Elena except Elena herself. "It's an investment," Elena said, repeating the justification she'd crafted during a sleepless night in her cramped apartment above Chen's grocery. "Property values will recover eventually." Nancy's silence spoke volumes. The afternoon crawled by with painful normalcy. Elena checked in returns, helped Mrs. Patterson find large print mysteries, and listened to 16-year-old Jamie Kowalski, Pete's grandson, complain about his American literature assignment. The routine that had once comforted her now felt like a cage. Every task seemed pointless, every interaction hollow. She caught herself staring out the rain-streaked windows towards Sorrow Hill, where she couldn't quite see her house but could feel its presence like a persistent ache. At closing time, Elena stood in the parking lot watching her co-workers drive away to their normal lives. Nancy to her husband and 2 college-aged sons, Carol to her book club meeting, young Dylan to whatever 23-year-olds did on Tuesday evenings. Elena had nowhere to go but her studio apartment, where Michael's coffee mug still sat unwashed in the sink and his clothes still hung in the too-small closet. She'd been 26 when they married, fresh out of library school and convinced that love and good intentions could conquer anything. Michael had been working construction then, saving money for the contracting business he planned to start. They'd mapped out their future with the confidence of people who'd never been seriously disappointed. The house they'd buy, the children they'd raise, the life they'd build together in this quiet town where nothing terrible ever happened. Except terrible things did happen. Hearts stopped beating. Insurance companies found excuses not to pay. Savings accounts emptied. And 29-year-old widows made inexplicable decisions that worried their friends and scandalized their neighbors. Elena's phone buzzed with a text from her sister Maria in Portland, called Nancy. "She says you bought a haunted house? Call me back. Now." 3 missed calls from her mother, 2 voicemails from Michael's brother asking about the insurance money, 1 message from her landlord reminding her that the lease was up at the end of the month. Standing in the library parking lot as darkness gathered around the streetlights, Elena pressed both hands to her belly and felt her daughter's restless movements. In 6 weeks she would be responsible for another human being. She needed stability, security, a safe place to raise her child. Instead, she'd blown their last $200 on a house that might collapse if she looked at it wrong. But as she started her car and drove toward town, Elena found herself taking the long way home, the route that wound past Sorrow Hill, and when the condemned Victorian came into view, dark and crooked against the storm clouds, something deep in her chest loosened for the first time in weeks. The house was waiting for her. She could feel it calling, even from a distance, promising something her ordinary world could never provide. Elena pulled over to the side of Millbrook Road, her car's engine ticking in the sudden silence. Through the windshield, the Victorian house sat like a wounded animal against the darkening sky, its broken windows reflecting the last traces of daylight. She should drive away, return to her apartment, call Maria back, be the responsible, expectant mother everyone wanted her to be. Instead, she cut the engine. The moment her feet touched the muddy ground, the house seemed to shift. Not physically, Elena was certain of that, but something in its presence changed, like a held breath finally released. Her daughter responded with a series of sharp kicks, more active than she'd been all day. Elena approached the sagging front porch, fishing the heavy iron key from her jacket pocket. The auctioneer had handed it to her with barely concealed disgust, muttering about liability waivers and insurance claims. Now the metal felt warm against her palm, almost eager. The door opened with a groan that seemed to echo through more than just empty rooms. Elena stepped inside, and the world tilted. Where yesterday there had been rotted floorboards, now polished oak gleamed in the beam of her phone's flashlight. The water stains had vanished from the walls, replaced by faded but intact wallpaper, roses and ivy in deep burgundy and gold. The musty smell of decay was gone, replaced by something impossible, the faint scent of lavender and fresh bread. Elena's phone slipped from nerveless fingers, clattering to the floor. The sound echoed strangely, as if the house were much larger than its exterior suggested. In the darkness beyond her fallen phone's dim glow, she heard the whisper of fabric against wood, footsteps that weren't quite footsteps, and underneath it all, a lullaby. Soft and wordless, the melody drifted down from somewhere upstairs, a woman's voice humming notes that seemed to wrap around Elena's heart and squeeze. Her daughter went still in her womb. Listening, Elena found herself swaying in rhythm with the music, her hands moving instinctively to her belly. The gas lamps along the walls flickered to life one by one, casting dancing shadows that made the restored wallpaper seem to breathe. Elena knew she should run. Every rational part of her mind screamed warnings about hallucinations and stress-induced breaks from reality. But the lullaby continued, and with each note, the house seemed to settle more firmly around her, not trapping her, but welcoming her home. She bent to retrieve her phone, and the screen showed 17 missed calls, all from Maria. The most recent text read, "Elena, I'm driving to Millbrook right now. Don't do anything stupid until I get there." The lullaby stopped abruptly. Elena looked up to find a figure standing at the top of the staircase, translucent as morning mist, wearing a white nightgown that might have been fashionable in 1890. The woman's face was young but marked by profound sadness, her dark hair loose around her shoulders. She pressed one pale hand to her own swollen belly in a gesture Elena recognized with startling clarity. "Mary Fairweather," Elena whispered. The name came from somewhere deeper than memory, somewhere that had always known this moment would arrive. The apparition, for what else could she be, smiled with infinite gentleness and nodded. When she spoke, her voice seemed to come from the walls themselves, soft as settling dust. "The house remembers," Mary said. "Every love, every loss, every life that grew within these walls. Your child, she belongs here, as do you." Elena's phone rang, Maria's name flashing insistently on the screen. The modern sound shattered whatever spell had transformed the house. The gas lamps guttered out. The polished floors returned to their water-stained ruin. Mary Fairweather faded like smoke until only empty darkness remained upstairs. But the warmth lingered, and the promise. Elena answered the phone with shaking hands. "Elena? Jesus, I've been trying to reach you for hours. I'm 20 minutes outside Millbrook. What the hell were you thinking? Buying some decrepit—" "The house isn't what people think it is," Elena interrupted, her voice steadier than she felt. Around her, the ordinary decay reasserted itself, but she could still smell lavender, still feel the echo of that otherworldly welcome. "Elena, you're scaring me. Nancy said you've been acting strange, and now this haunted house nonsense." "What if it's not nonsense?" The question emerged before Elena could consider the implications. What if some places can offer things that the ordinary world can't? Silence on the other end of the line. Then, "Elena, honey, I think you need help, professional help. This isn't normal grief anymore." Elena looked around the ruined front hall, then up toward the empty staircase where Mary Fairweather had stood. Her daughter moved restlessly, as if responding to some conversation Elena couldn't hear. "I have to go, Maria. I'll call you later." "Elena, don't you dare hang up on—" Elena ended the call and turned off her phone. In the resulting silence she heard it again, the faintest whisper of that lullaby, beckoning her deeper into the house's embrace. She stood at a crossroads between the safe, rational world that wanted to heal her and the impossible sanctuary that promised to transform her. Her daughter kicked once decisively. Elena climbed the stairs toward whatever waited in the darkness above. Elena's foot hesitated on the third step as the ancient wood creaked beneath her weight. The sound echoed through the darkness like a warning, and suddenly the magnitude of what she was doing crashed over her like ice water. She was alone in a condemned house, 8 months pregnant, following a ghost toward an unknown second floor that could collapse at any moment. What kind of mother am I becoming? The question stopped her cold. Below, her discarded phone lay silent on the warped floorboards, Maria's frantic concern still echoing in her ears. Professional help. This isn't normal grief anymore. The words stung because they carried the weight of truth. Normal people didn't buy haunted houses with their last $200. Normal people didn't see apparitions or hear impossible lullabies. Normal people sought therapy and took medication and slowly, safely healed. But Elena hadn't felt normal since the moment Michael collapsed in their kitchen, his coffee mug shattering against the linoleum as his heart simply stopped beating. 28 years old, perfect health, no warning. Just there 1 second and gone the next, leaving Elena to navigate pregnancy and grief and financial ruin, while everyone around her dispensed advice about moving on and staying strong and thinking of the baby. Think of the baby. Everyone said it. Dr. Martinez when he prescribed bed rest. Nancy when she suggested taking leave from the library. Her mother when she called with updates about support groups and grief counseling. Even the insurance adjuster had mentioned it while explaining why Michael's policy might not pay out. You need to think of the baby, Elena. But what if thinking of the baby meant accepting something the rational world couldn't offer? What if the conventional path, The safe apartment, the careful prenatal care, the approved emotional processing wasn't enough anymore. Elena pressed her palm against the stair railing, and for a moment she could swear she felt warmth spreading up from the wood. Above her, the lullaby whispered again, so faint she might have imagined it. Her daughter stirred in response, not the sharp kicks of earlier, but a gentle rolling motion, as if the child were settling into a more comfortable position. This is insane, Elena thought. She was having conversations with ghosts and making major life decisions based on what might be stress-induced hallucinations. She should call Maria back, apologize for hanging up, and drive to the nearest hospital for a psychological evaluation. She should think about her child's future, about stability and security and all the practical things her daughter would need. But even as these thoughts circled through her mind, Elena found herself taking another step upward, then another. The lullaby grew slightly stronger, and with it came the impossible scent of lavender and something else, baby powder, soft and sweet. At the top of the stairs, Elena paused again. 3 doors led off the narrow hallway, all standing slightly ajar. Moonlight filtered through a window at the far end, revealing wallpaper that shifted between decay and restoration with each flicker of her vision. In the nearest doorway, she glimpsed the edge of what might have been a rocking chair, though when she looked directly at it, only shadows remained. Your child belongs here, as do you. Mary Fairweather's words echoed in her memory, but now they carried weight instead of comfort. Belong here how? Elena thought of the stories Sarah Morrison had shared, 3 generations of women, all dead or disappeared. Mary had hanged herself in the parlor. Catherine had died of consumption in the master bedroom. Louise had simply vanished one winter night. 3 women, 3 tragedies. And now Elena stood in their house, pregnant and alone, drawn by the same impossible promises that might have lured them to their fates. What if the house didn't restore itself out of love, but hunger? What if it collected grieving women like butterflies pinned to a board, beautiful and eternal, and forever trapped? Elena's hand moved protectively to her belly as the full implications hit her. She wasn't just risking her own life by staying here, she was risking her daughter's future. The smart thing would be to leave, drive back to town, apologize to everyone she'd worried, and find a normal solution to her problems. There were programs for pregnant widows, social services that could help bridge the gap until the insurance money came through. She could move in with Maria temporarily, swallow her pride and accept help from family. But as Elena turned toward the stairs, preparing to flee back to the rational world, she heard it clearly for the first time, not just the lullaby, but words, soft and distant, but unmistakably real. Sleep, my darling, safe and warm, here where love lives on. Elena's breath caught. The melody was one Michael used to hum while rubbing her feet in the evenings, making up silly lyrics about their future child. She'd forgotten it completely until this moment, but the house remembered. The house remembered everything. Standing at the threshold between worlds, Elena closed her eyes and felt the weight of her choice settling around her like a shroud. Elena opened her eyes and walked deliberately toward the sound. The first door revealed a nursery that shouldn't exist. Not the broken-down shell she'd glimpsed during yesterday's inspection, but a complete sanctuary painted in soft yellows and greens. A handmade crib sat beneath a window that no longer leaked, its mattress covered with a quilt depicting dancing rabbits. Shelves lined the walls, filled with leather-bound children's books and wooden toys that gleamed as if freshly carved. In the corner, a rocking chair moved gently back and forth, though no one sat in it. Michael's lullaby continued, emanating from the very air around her. Elena stepped across the threshold, and her daughter responded with the strongest kick yet, not uncomfortable but joyful, like a greeting between old friends. This was the moment. Elena could feel the weight of it, pressing against her chest, demanding recognition. She stood at the center of a miracle that defied every law of physics and reason, watching dust motes dance in moonlight that shouldn't have been able to penetrate the boarded windows. Behind her lay Maria's concern, Dr. Martinez's prescriptions, the careful architecture of a normal life built on compromise and gradual healing. Ahead lay something unprecedented and impossible and utterly unknown. Her phone was probably ringing again downstairs. Maria would be pulling into Millbrook soon, ready to stage a proper intervention. By morning there would be calls to therapists and social workers, well-meaning conversations about grief-induced breaks from reality. Elena would be guided gently but firmly back toward the acceptable path, medicated if necessary, supervised until her daughter was born, and Elena could be trusted to make rational decisions again. The thought filled her with a panic so sharp it stole her breath. She pressed both hands against her belly, feeling her daughter's restless energy beneath her palms, and realized that somewhere in the past 24 hours, normal had stopped being enough. "I can't go back," she whispered to the empty nursery, and the words carried the force of an oath. She couldn't return to the studio apartment where Michael's absence echoed from every corner. Couldn't pretend that conventional wisdom would fill the hollow space where their future used to be. Couldn't raise her daughter on the ruins of dead dreams and call it healing. The rocking chair slowed its movement, as if listening. Elena approached it slowly, running her fingers along its smooth wooden arm. The craftsmanship was extraordinary, every curve and joint fitted together with the kind of care that took generations to perfect. When she sat down, the chair embraced her with impossible comfort, cradling her weight and adjusting to support her swollen belly as if it had been made specifically for her body. The lullaby grew stronger, not just Michael's melody now, but harmonies underneath, other voices, other mothers who had sung their children to sleep in this same chair. Elena could almost see them, Mary Fairweather with her dark hair and tragic eyes, Catherine Morrison rocking a baby who would grow up to tell stories about ghosts, Louise Blackwood humming through the winter nights before she disappeared. "What happened to you?" Elena wondered. "Did you find what you were looking for, or did it find you?" But the fear that had gripped her moments ago was fading, replaced by something deeper and more complex. The house wasn't just offering shelter, it was offering transformation. A chance to become something more than a grieving widow struggling to survive. A chance to give her daughter a life touched by wonder instead of loss. The insurance money might never come. Her job at the library paid barely enough to cover rent, much less raise a child. Maria would try to help, but Elena had seen the strain in her sister's marriage, the careful way her brother-in-law calculated expenses and made pointed comments about Elena getting back on her feet. There would be assistance programs and charity, the grinding humiliation of proving her need over and over again to bureaucrats who saw her as a case number. Or there could be this, a house that remembered love and offered it freely, rooms that restored themselves with magic instead of mortgage payments, a nursery that waited with infinite patience for the child it was meant to protect. Elena began to rock gently, letting the chair's rhythm synchronize with her heartbeat. Her daughter settled into stillness, as if she too were listening to the impossible lullabies that filled the air. Outside, storm clouds gathered again, but Elena felt no urge to flee. The house wrapped around her like an embrace, promising safety from more than just the weather. When car headlights swept across the boarded windows, Maria arriving, no doubt, armed with concern and rational arguments, Elena didn't move from the rocking chair. She had crossed the threshold now, stepped fully into the mystery that had claimed 3 women before her. Whatever came next, whatever price the house might demand, she would face it here in this impossible nursery, surrounded by the love of mothers who had made the same choice. The beam of a flashlight bobbed up the front steps, accompanied by Maria's worried voice calling Elena's name. But Elena just closed her eyes and continued rocking, letting the house's ancient lullabies carry her deeper into whatever transformation awaited. "Elena, Elena, where are you?" Maria's voice cut through the night, sharp with panic and exhaustion from the long drive. Her footsteps echoed on the front porch, followed by the creak of the door Elena had left unlocked. Elena remained in the rocking chair, cradled by the house's impossible warmth. The nursery around her flickered between states, suggesting that the house was Sometimes the restored sanctuary with its dancing rabbits and leather-bound books. Sometimes the decay Maria would see if she climbed these stairs. The house was testing her, Elena realized, measuring her commitment against the intrusion of the rational world. "This place is a death trap." Maria's voice drifted up from below, along with the scratch of her flashlight beam across ruined walls. "Elena, please, we need to talk." "We." Elena caught the pronoun's weight. Maria hadn't come alone in her rescue mission. She'd brought reinforcements, probably David, her husband, maybe even Dr. Martinez. People who cared about Elena enough to stage an intervention, armed with statistics about postpartum depression and the dangers of social isolation. Elena's daughter stirred restlessly, as if sensing the approaching disruption. The lullabies grew fainter, retreating deeper into the house's memory. Around the nursery's edges, shadows crept inward, and the scent of lavender began to fade. "Choose," the house seemed to whisper. "Choose now, before they take the choice away." Footsteps on the stairs now. Careful, cautious, but climbing steadily. Elena pressed deeper into the rocking chair's embrace, and for a moment she felt other presences gathering around her. Not visible but tangible as heat from a fire. Mary Fairweather's gentle sadness, Catherine Morrison's fierce protectiveness, Louise Blackwood's desperate hope. 3 women who had faced this same moment of decision, who had chosen the house's impossible gifts over the world's reasonable limitations. "Elena?" Maria's voice was closer now, just outside the nursery door. "Honey, I can see light under the door. Are you in there?" Light. Elena looked around the restored nursery, seeing it clearly now. Gas lamps flickering along the walls, moonlight streaming through unboarded windows, the soft glow that seemed to emanate from the walls themselves. But Maria would see only darkness and decay. The house was revealing its true nature to Elena, while maintaining its facade of ruin for the outside world. The door opened slowly, and Maria stepped into what she perceived as a gutted, dangerous room. Elena watched her sister's face, the careful control that barely masked her horror at Elena's condition. To Maria, Elena must look like a mad woman, sitting alone in the dark among rotting floorboards and peeling wallpaper, rocking back and forth while talking to empty air. "Oh, Elena." Maria's voice broke on the words. She moved carefully across what she saw as unstable flooring, her flashlight beam sweeping over walls that Elena knew were covered in beautiful paper, but that showed Maria only water stains and mold. "What have you done to yourself?" "I found somewhere safe," Elena said simply. The words felt strange on her tongue, true in the reality the house had shown her, but incomprehensible to anyone standing outside its magic. Maria knelt beside the rocking chair, and Elena caught a glimpse of herself through her sister's eyes, haggard, isolated, 8 months pregnant, and sitting in a condemned building while claiming to have found safety. It was the portrait of a woman who'd lost her grip on reality. "Safe?" Maria's flashlight beam found a section of ceiling where plaster hung in dangerous chunks. "Elena, this place could collapse any minute. The floors are rotted through, there's no electricity, no heat, it's barely standing." But even as Maria spoke, Elena felt the house responding to the challenge. Warmth spread through the floorboards beneath the rocking chair. The gas lamps brightened, though Maria couldn't see them. The lullabies swelled protectively around Elena's consciousness, and her daughter settled into peaceful stillness. "David's waiting in the car," Maria continued, her voice carefully gentle. "Dr. Martinez is meeting us at the hospital. We're going to get you help, real help. You and the baby both." The baby. There it was again, the phrase everyone used to justify their interventions, but Elena finally understood what they really meant. They wanted to save the baby from her, from the dangerous choices grief had led her to make. They would hospitalize her, evaluate her, medicate her back to acceptable numbness. Her daughter would be born into the sterile safety of institutional care, while Elena was rebuilt into someone capable of rational decisions. "I'm not leaving," Elena said, and the house pulsed with approval around her. Maria's control cracked. "Elena, you bought a haunted house with your last $200. You're sitting in a room that should be condemned, talking about safety, while the ceiling is literally falling in around you. This isn't grief anymore. This is a complete break from reality. The gas lamps flickered with Elena's sudden anger. How dare they reduce this to pathology? She had found something miraculous, something that offered her daughter a future beyond mere survival, and they wanted to medicate it away because it didn't fit their narrow understanding of what was possible. What if reality isn't enough? Elena stood carefully, one hand on the chair's arm for support. Around her, the nursery's restoration strengthened, as if fed by her defiance. What if sometimes the impossible is the only thing that can save us? The silence stretched between them, thick with years of sisterly understanding, now fractured by circumstances neither had prepared for. Maria's flashlight beam trembled slightly, casting dancing shadows across walls that Elena saw as warmly papered, but that existed for Maria as water-stained plaster and exposed lath. Elena. Maria's voice carried the careful tone of someone addressing a wild animal. Listen to yourself. You're talking about impossible things like they're real. That's not grief. That's a psychiatric emergency. Elena felt the house recoil at the word psychiatric, its warmth pulling back like a wounded creature. The lullabies faded to whispers, and for a terrifying moment, she glimpsed the nursery as Maria saw it. Rotting floorboards, a broken window frame, walls streaked with mold and decades of neglect. The beautiful rocking chair became a paint-splattered stepladder someone had abandoned years ago. But then her daughter moved, a gentle roll that seemed to anchor the magic, and the restoration flowed back. Elena gripped the chair's arm, feeling the smooth wood solid and real beneath her palm. "You can't see it," Elena said, wonder creeping into her voice. "You're standing right here, and you can't see any of it." "See what?" Maria's frustration sharpened. "Elena, there's nothing here but decay and danger. Please, just come with me. Let us help you." Elena turned slowly, taking in the nursery's impossible beauty, the dancing rabbit quilt, the leather-bound books, the soft yellow walls that glowed with their own inner light. How could she explain this to someone trapped in the ordinary world? How could she make Maria understand that sometimes miracles chose you, not the other way around? "3 women lived here before me," Elena said, settling back into the rocking chair. "Mary Fairweather, Catherine Morrison, Louise Blackwood. They all faced the same choice I'm facing now. Elena, Mary hanged herself rather than leave. Catherine died of consumption, but her daughter lived to tell stories about the ghosts she grew up with. Louise just disappeared one winter, but the records show her baby survived." Maria's face went pale in the flashlight's glow. "You're scaring me. These sound like threats, like you're planning to hurt yourself." "No." Elena began rocking again, letting the chair's rhythm calm her racing heart. "Don't you see? They didn't die because of the house. They died trying to balance 2 worlds, this one and the ordinary one. The house demands commitment. It demands choice." Footsteps echoed from downstairs, David growing impatient with their prolonged absence. Elena heard the low rumble of his voice calling up to Maria, asking if everything was all right. Soon they'd both come up, maybe force Elena physically from the house if gentle persuasion failed. The house sensed the approaching crisis too. The air grew thick with protective energy, and Elena felt presences gathering in the corners of the room. The spirits of women who had stood at this same crossroads, who understood the weight of choosing love over logic, magic over mundane survival. "Maria." Elena reached for her sister's hand, but Maria pulled back instinctively. The rejection stung, but Elena pressed on. "What if I told you Michael visits me here? What if I said his voice guides me through the restoration, that he sings our daughter to sleep every night? I'd say you need professional help." Maria's words came out harsh, desperate. "I'd say grief has broken something in your brain, and instead of healing, you are retreating into fantasies that are going to get you and your baby killed." The baby kicked sharply at the word killed, and Elena winced. Around them, the house shuddered, not with decay but with something deeper. Ancient timbers creaked in harmonious protest, and the gas lamps flared brighter. She can feel it too, Elena whispered, one hand pressed to her belly. The house responds to her, Maria. When she moves, the restoration grows stronger. When she's calm, the whole building settles into peace. This isn't just about me anymore. Elena, please. Maria dropped to her knees beside the chair, tears bright in her eyes. I drove 4 hours through a storm because I'm terrified you're going to die in this place. You bought a house for pocket change because no one else would touch it. That should tell you something. It tells me I was meant to find it. Elena's voice strengthened with conviction. Everyone else saw ruin. I see restoration. Everyone else felt fear. I feel welcome. Or the house is making you feel what it needs you to feel. Maria's words hit like cold water. What if it's not offering you healing? What if it's feeding on your grief, your desperation? What if those other women didn't choose to stay? What if they couldn't leave? The question hung in the air like smoke, seeping into Elena's certainty and leaving doubt in its wake. Around them, the nursery flickered again, beautiful one moment, derelict the next, as if Elena's faith were the only thing holding the magic together. From downstairs, David's voice grew more insistent. Time was running out, and Elena felt the house gathering itself for whatever came next, preparing to protect its newest inhabitant against all threats, even those who claimed to love her. Elena's world shattered like glass. The doubt Maria had planted took root with vicious speed, spreading through Elena's consciousness like poison. What if they couldn't leave? The question echoed in her mind as the nursery's restoration wavered, flickering between miracle and decay with each beat of her hammering heart. The house sensed her faltering faith immediately. The gas lamps dimmed to dying embers. The dancing rabbits on the quilt froze mid-leap, their embroidered forms becoming flat and lifeless. The warm yellow walls began to bleed through with water stains and mold, reality asserting itself through the cracks in Elena's belief. No, Elena whispered, pressing both hands to her belly as her daughter began to thrash with sudden distress. No, I felt it. I felt you welcome us. But the lullabies were fading, Michael's voice growing distant and hollow. The rocking chair beneath her creaked ominously, its beautiful craftsmanship dissolving into the broken stepladder Maria saw. Elena gripped what had been smooth wood moments before, feeling splinters bite into her palms. What if it's feeding on your grief? The thought hit like a physical blow. Elena remembered her first night here, how desperately she'd needed to believe in something beyond her empty apartment and emptier future, how readily she'd accepted the house's offerings, never questioning why a building would restore itself, why the dead would sing to comfort the living. Elena, what's wrong? Maria's voice cut through her spiraling panic. You look, oh God, are you having contractions? Elena doubled over as pain lanced through her abdomen, not labor, but something else. Terror, maybe, or the physical manifestation of a faith crumbling. Around her, the house groaned like a living thing in distress. Plaster rained from the ceiling as the building's carefully maintained facade began to collapse. The price. Elena finally understood what the house had been preparing to collect. Not her death, like the women before her, but something more precious. Her daughter. The baby who responded so strongly to the house's magic, whose very presence fed the restoration. The house didn't want Elena, it wanted what grew inside her. We have to go, Elena gasped, struggling to rise from the chair that now felt like a trap. Maria, help me. We have to leave now. But when she tried to stand, her legs refused to support her weight. It wasn't pregnancy fatigue. It was as if the house itself were holding her down, invisible hands pressing her back into the chair. The air grew thick and suffocating, charged with an energy that made her skin crawl. Elena! David's voice boomed from the stairway, no longer patient. The floor's giving way down here. This whole place is coming apart. The house was angry. Elena could feel its rage rolling through the walls like thunder, furious at her betrayal after it had shown her such wonders. The gas lamps flared back to life, but their light was cold now, casting harsh shadows that seemed to reach for her with grasping fingers. The lullabies returned as discordant whispers, Michael's voice twisted into something she didn't recognize. "You promised," the house seemed to say through a dozen phantom voices. "You chose us. You can't take her away now." Elena's daughter went still inside her, not peaceful, but frozen with an unnatural quiet that sent ice through Elena's veins. She pressed her hands to her belly, trying to feel movement, any sign that the baby was all right, but found only terrifying stillness. "Something's wrong with the baby," Elena whispered, and Maria's face went white. "We're getting you out of here. Right now." Maria grabbed Elena's arm, but when she tried to pull her sister from the chair, Elena's body wouldn't budge. It was as if she'd become part of the house itself, rooted to this spot like the foundation stones. David appeared in the doorway, his expression shifting from impatience to alarm as he took in the scene. Elena trapped in what looked to him like a broken stepladder, her face grey with pain and terror, while Maria pulled futilely at her arms. Can't move," Elena gasped. The house's hold on her was strengthening, feeding off her daughter's life force to anchor itself to the world. She understood now why the other women had died here, not from choice, but from the house's hunger, its need to consume what it had been offered. The building shuddered around them, and Elena heard David curse as timber groaned somewhere below. But this wasn't structural collapse. This was the house defending itself, willing to bring down its own walls rather than lose its prize. Elena's vision began to grey at the edges, her daughter's unnatural stillness sapping her own strength. She had been such a fool, mistaking predation for love, possession for protection. The house hadn't been offering her healing. It had been preparing her for harvest. As consciousness started to slip away, Elena made one last desperate choice. She stopped fighting the house's magic and instead reached deeper into it, past the false comfort and seductive warmth, searching for the source of its power. If she was going to save her daughter, she needed to understand exactly what was feeding on them both. The source of the house's power hit Elena like a physical blow. A writhing mass of accumulated grief and desperation, decades of sorrow crystallized into something hungry and alive. She felt herself falling deeper into its core, past the pretty illusions and seductive whispers, into a darkness that reeked of unfulfilled promises and broken dreams. Here, she realized with dawning horror, here are the others. Mary Fairweather's voice rose from the depths, no longer gentle but raw with betrayal. "It showed me my stillborn son, whole and healthy. Let me hold him for 3 perfect days before it demanded payment." Catherine Morrison's fierce protectiveness had curdled into bitter warning. "My daughter lived, yes, but what kind of life? Trapped here, talking to ghosts, growing up in a prison made of false hope." Louise Blackwood's desperate hope had become endless weeping. "I thought I could bargain with it, thought I could give it part of myself and keep my baby safe. But it always wants more, always." The house had lied. Every restoration, every comfort, every moment of peace, all of it had been bait in an elaborate trap. The building didn't create miracles, it fed on the desperate need to believe in them. It had shown Elena exactly what she needed to see, offered precisely what her shattered heart craved, all while preparing to devour what mattered most. Elena's daughter wasn't just still now. She was fading. Elena could feel her life force being drawn away, siphoned into the house's insatiable hunger. The building was consuming her child from the inside out, using Elena's own body as a conduit for its feast. "No," Elena whispered, but her voice came out broken, defeated. The house had played her perfectly. Every moment of joy, every vision of Michael, every promise of safety, all of it designed to bring her to this moment when resistance would be impossible. David was beside her now, adding his strength to Maria's as they tried to break the house's hold on Elena. But she could see in their faces that they were fighting something they couldn't understand, pulling against a force that existed beyond the physical world. To them, she must look like she was having some kind of psychotic break, frozen in place by her own damaged mind rather than supernatural bonds. "Call 911, David shouted to Maria. "Tell them we need an ambulance and probably the fire department. This whole structure's going to come down." But Elena knew better. The house would let its physical form collapse before releasing its prize. The Victorian cottage was just a shell. The real entity lived in the spaces between, in grief made manifest, in the hunger that lurked at the heart of desperate hope. The phantom lullabies swelled around her again, but now she heard them clearly. They weren't songs of comfort, but of mourning, keening cries for all the children the house had claimed over the decades. Her daughter would join that chorus, another voice in the supernatural symphony of loss that powered the building's existence. Elena's vision darkened further, and she felt herself splitting. Part of her still trapped in the chair, while another part drifted deeper into the house's core. She could see the full scope of its deception now, the careful architecture of lies it had built around her vulnerable heart. Every restored room had been a step deeper into its web. Every night of peaceful sleep had been bought with her daughter's future. The worst part wasn't the betrayal. It was how perfectly the house had understood her. It had known exactly which wounds to heal, which hopes to nurture, which fears to soothe. It had studied her grief like a map and followed it straight to her deepest vulnerability, her desperate need to believe that love could transcend death, that some gifts were worth any price. Michael, Elena thought desperately, reaching for the memory of her husband's true voice beneath the house's mimicry. But even that comfort was tainted now. How much of what she'd experienced had been real, and how much had been the house wearing Michael's face to lead her deeper into its trap? Around her, the physical world continued its emergency. David shouting into his phone, Maria crying as she pulled uselessly at Elena's arms, the building groaning as its supernatural rage destabilized its own structure. But Elena was beyond their help now, locked in a battle for her daughter's life against an enemy that had been planning this moment for months. The house's hunger pressed against her consciousness like a living weight, demanding surrender. It had waited so patiently, offered such beautiful lies, endured her doubts and fears. Now it wanted what had always been promised, the new life that would feed its existence for another generation. Elena felt her daughter's heartbeat growing fainter, each pulse weaker than the last. Soon, there would be nothing left to fight for, nothing left to save. The house would have its prize, and Elena would be left with nothing but the bitter knowledge that her own desperate love had been the weapon used to destroy what she'd tried to protect. All seemed lost, and in the growing darkness, Elena finally understood the true price of believing in impossible things. But in that moment of absolute despair, Elena felt something unexpected. Her daughter's heartbeat suddenly strengthened, not weakening further but pulsing with fierce, defiant life. And with that pulse came a revelation that shattered everything Elena thought she understood about the house, about herself, about the choice she faced. The baby wasn't being consumed. She was fighting back. Elena gasped as the truth hit her with crystalline clarity. The house had made one crucial miscalculation. It had assumed Elena's daughter would be as vulnerable as the other children, as easily harvested. But this baby was different. She carried something the house hadn't anticipated, Michael's gift. Michael had been a music therapist who worked with trauma survivors, helping them heal through sound and rhythm. Elena had always marveled at his ability to reach people others had given up on, to find the frequency that could break through pain and restore hope. She'd thought it was just skill, just training and natural empathy. She'd been wrong. It had been something deeper, a sensitivity to the spaces between physical and spiritual, an ability to sense and manipulate the very vibrations that connected souls. And he had passed that gift to his daughter. Elena felt her child's power awakening, tiny fingers of pure intention reaching out from the womb to touch the house's core. Where Elena had found only hungry darkness, her daughter found something else, the original spirit of the house itself, buried beneath decades of accumulated grief and perverted purpose. The Victorian cottage hadn't always been a trap. Once, it had been exactly what Elena had first sensed, a place of genuine love and protection, built by a man who'd wanted nothing more than to shelter his growing family. But when tragedy struck and children began to die within its walls, the grief had twisted its purpose, corrupting love into obsession, protection into possession. Elena's daughter wasn't just fighting the house's hunger. She was calling to its buried heart, the small spark of authentic care that still existed beneath the monster it had become. And that original spirit was responding, recognizing in the unborn child the pure love it had forgotten how to feel. "Oh my God," Elena whispered as understanding flooded through her. "You're not the first. You're the last." The house had been waiting not for another victim, but for someone strong enough to heal it, someone who could separate the love from the loss, the protection from the possession. The other women had been too broken by their own grief to see past the facade, but Elena's daughter carried no trauma, no desperate hunger that could be exploited. She was pure potential, untouched by the world's cruelties, and her father's gift gave her the power to reach into spiritual spaces and restore their proper harmony. Elena stopped fighting the house's hold on her and instead opened herself completely to her daughter's emerging power. She felt the baby's consciousness expand, touching first Elena's own wounded heart and then reaching beyond, into the building's twisted essence. Where her spirit moved, corruption began to burn away like morning mist. The phantom voices of Mary, Catherine, and Louise rose again, but their tone had changed from warning to wonder. Elena's daughter was freeing them too, unraveling the bonds that had kept them trapped in endless cycles of grief. One by one, Elena felt their spirits lighten and lift away, finally able to rest. "Elena, what's happening?" Maria's voice seemed to come from very far away. "The building, it's changing." Elena opened her eyes to see the nursery transforming around them, but not into the seductive paradise the house had shown her before. This restoration was different, gentler, more honest. The walls didn't glow with false light, but simply looked well-maintained. The furniture was beautiful but clearly real, built by human hands with human love. The lullaby that filled the air was her own voice, humming unconsciously as her daughter's power worked through her. The chair beneath Elena solidified into genuine mahogany, crafted with exquisite care but bearing the honest marks of age and use. She could move again, the supernatural bonds dissolving as the house's hunger transformed into something healthier, not the desperate need to possess, but the simple desire to provide sanctuary. Elena stood slowly, one hand pressed to her belly, where her daughter continued her impossible work. Around them, the building settled into new stability, its groaning replaced by the comfortable creaks of a house that remembered how to be at peace with itself. "The house isn't evil," Elena said softly, meeting Maria's bewildered gaze. "It was just sick, broken by too much loss. But she's healing it. Our daughter is teaching it how to love without consuming, how to protect without imprisoning." David lowered his phone, his expression shifting from alarm to amazement as he witnessed the impossible restoration happening around them. "Elena, I don't understand what I'm seeing, but—" "Neither do I," Elena admitted. "But I know this. We're safe now, all of us. The house remembers what it was meant to be." Elena felt her daughter settle into peaceful rest, her work complete, the gift she'd inherited from her father having accomplished what seemed impossible, the redemption of a place where love had lost its way. Elena remained still for several heartbeats after her daughter's power settled, letting the profound transformation sink into her bones. The nursery around them hummed with a different energy now, not the electric hunger that had nearly consumed them, but something warmer, steadier, like the difference between lightning and lamplight. "We should sit down," Elena said, surprising herself with the steadiness in her voice. "All of us. There's so much I need to explain, and I think—" She paused, one hand pressed to her belly as the baby stirred gently. "I think we're going to need each other for what comes next." Maria's face was pale but determined as she helped Elena settle back into the mahogany chair, which now felt genuinely supportive rather than imprisoning. "Elena, what you just did, what we just witnessed, this goes beyond anything I thought possible, but I need to know Is it over? Are you safe now? The immediate danger is over, Elena said carefully, watching David lower himself onto the window seat with the cautious movements of someone whose worldview had just been fundamentally shaken. But this is really just the beginning. The house is healed, but it's also awakened. And our daughter, she pressed both hands to her belly, she's going to be born with abilities that neither of us fully understands yet. David ran his hands through his hair, leaving it disheveled. Elena, I've spent my entire career dealing with structural engineering, with things I can measure and calculate. What I just witnessed breaks every law of physics I know. That said, he looked directly at her. I saw you trapped by something that wasn't natural forces, and I saw you break free through something that definitely wasn't conventional either. So where does that leave us? Elena felt a surge of gratitude toward this practical man who was trying so hard to process the impossible. It leaves us with a choice. You both came here to help me, and you've seen things that most people would dismiss as hallucinations or worse. You could walk away right now, pretend this never happened, and no one would blame you. Is that what you want? Maria asked quietly. For us to leave? No, Elena admitted. God, no. I need you both more than ever now. But I also need you to understand what you'd be signing up for. This house is going to continue changing as my daughter grows. People are going to notice, ask questions. And when she's born... Elena paused, remembering the incredible power she'd felt flowing through her child. She's going to need people who can help her understand her gift, who can keep her grounded in the real world while teaching her to navigate the supernatural one. David leaned forward, his engineer's mind clearly working through the implications. You're talking about raising a child with paranormal abilities in a house that just demonstrated its own consciousness. The practical challenges alone. How do you hide something like this? How do you give her a normal childhood? Maybe normal isn't the goal, Elena said slowly, the words forming as she spoke them. Maybe the goal is helping her use her gift wisely, the way Michael would have wanted. He spent his life helping people heal from trauma. Our daughter has the power to do that on a level he never imagined, but only if she's raised by people who understand both the wonder and the responsibility of what she can do. Maria reached over and squeezed Elena's hand. You're not asking us to babysit, are you? You're asking us to become her family, her chosen family. I'm asking if you want to be part of something unprecedented, Elena said, to help raise a child who might be able to heal places and people in ways the world has never seen. But it won't be easy. We'll have to learn as we go, make mistakes, figure out how to balance the magical with the mundane. The three of them sat in contemplative silence as late afternoon light streamed through the nursery windows. Elena could feel her daughter's contentment, a warm presence that seemed to approve of this gathering, this tentative formation of an unconventional support system. I'm in, David said suddenly. I don't pretend to understand the supernatural aspects, but I understand the practical ones. You're going to need someone who can help maintain the house's normal facade, handle permits and inspections and all the bureaucratic challenges of living somewhere that might decide to remodel itself overnight. Plus, he added with a wry smile, my engineering career just got a lot more interesting. Maria's response was quieter but equally firm. I've watched you transform over these past months, Elena. You found strength I didn't know you had, made choices I couldn't have imagined. If you can do that, I can certainly figure out how to help raise a magical niece. Besides, she grinned, someone needs to make sure she knows her family history, the normal parts and the extraordinary ones. Elena felt tears prick her eyes, but they were tears of relief and gratitude rather than grief. For the first time since Michael's death, she wasn't facing the future alone. Her daughter would be born into a circle of love and protection, surrounded by people committed to helping her flourish. Thank you, she whispered. Both of you. I think we're going to need to make some plans. As the golden afternoon light began to fade, Elena felt the weight of what lay ahead settling around them like an inevitable tide. The immediate crisis had passed, but she could sense larger challenges gathering on the horizon. challenges that would test everything they'd just committed to. Plans, she repeated, her voice growing stronger. Yes, we need those. Because what happened here today, it's going to happen again. Maybe not the same way, but the house is fully awakened now, and my daughter's power is only going to grow stronger as she develops. David pulled out his phone and opened a notes app, his practical nature reasserting itself. Okay, let's start with the immediate concerns. Elena, when's your due date? 3 weeks, she said, and felt both excitement and terror at how close that seemed. Dr. Martinez has been monitoring everything closely, but she has no idea what she's actually dealing with. How do I explain to a medical team that my daughter might demonstrate supernatural abilities during birth? Maria leaned forward. We don't tell them. We prepare for multiple scenarios and handle whatever happens in the moment. David, how quickly can you research home birth options, just in case we need an alternative to the hospital? Already on it, he said, fingers moving across his screen. But Elena, are you prepared for the possibility that a normal birth might not be normal? After what we just witnessed, I think we have to assume your daughter's abilities could manifest in unexpected ways. Elena nodded, though the thought sent a chill through her. I've been feeling her respond to strong emotions, both mine and the house's, during labor, with all that intensity. She paused, imagining the possibilities. We might need to be somewhere we can contain any supernatural effects, somewhere private. Here, Maria said immediately. It should be here, shouldn't it? This house knows her already. It's been preparing for her arrival. Surely it would be safer than trying to manage her power in an unfamiliar environment. David looked up from his phone. I can find a midwife who specializes in unconventional situations, someone discreet, experienced with unusual circumstances. They do exist, people who work with families that have reasons to avoid traditional medical settings. Elena felt a flutter of gratitude mixed with apprehension. They were really doing this, planning to welcome her daughter in a house that had just demonstrated its own consciousness, preparing for a birth that might involve supernatural elements none of them fully understood. There's something else, Elena said, her voice dropping lower. The town. People here have been watching this house for generations, whispering about it. Some of them sensed what was wrong with it, even if they couldn't articulate it. They're going to notice the change. As if summoned by her words, the house itself seemed to respond. Elena felt a subtle shift in the air, and suddenly she could sense the building's awareness extending beyond its walls. It was monitoring the neighborhood, aware of old Mrs. Chen next door hanging laundry and pausing to stare at the Victorian's suddenly pristine exterior. It knew about the mail carrier who'd started taking a different route to avoid the creepy house, and was now confused by the warm, welcoming aura emanating from the property. The house is trying to integrate, Elena realized aloud. It wants to belong to the neighborhood again, but it's been an outsider for so long. That's actually manageable, David said thoughtfully. Gradual improvements, plausible explanations. We say you've been doing renovations room by room, keeping the work private because of your pregnancy. People will buy that, especially if they can see normal construction evidence. I can help with the social aspects, Maria added. Start taking walks with you, Elena. Let people see you looking healthy and happy. When the baby comes, we'll introduce her to the community gradually. Let them get used to having a young family in the old house. But Elena could feel the deeper current running beneath their practical planning. The house's transformation had been profound, and its new awareness extended far beyond cosmetic improvements. It was connected now to something larger, the spiritual currents that flowed through Millbrook, the grief and hope that shaped every family's story. My daughter isn't just going to heal houses, Elena said quietly. She's going to be drawn to pain wherever she finds it. This gift Michael passed to her. It's not something she'll be able to turn off. People are going to bring their troubles here, consciously or unconsciously. This house is going to become a beacon. The silence that followed was heavy with implication. Elena could see David and Maria grappling with the magnitude of what she was suggesting. They'd agreed to help raise one exceptional child, But Elena was describing something closer to establishing a sanctuary. "Then we'd better learn how to help her handle that responsibility," Maria said finally, "and how to protect her from those who might want to exploit such a gift." Elena felt her daughter stir again, responding to the emotional currents in the room. But there was something else in that movement, a sense of anticipation, as if the baby was eager to begin the work she'd been born to do. The final confrontation Elena had been dreading was taking shape, but it wasn't what she'd expected. It wouldn't be a battle against the house's hunger, but something far more complex, the challenge of raising a child whose very existence would reshape the world around her. The air in the nursery shifted suddenly, like the moment before a thunderstorm breaks. Elena felt her daughter's movements intensify. No longer the gentle stirrings of contentment, but something urgent, almost frantic. The baby was responding to something Elena couldn't yet perceive, a disturbance approaching from beyond the house's protective boundaries. "Something's wrong," Elena whispered, her hands instinctively moving to shield her belly. The restored Victorian around them seemed to tense, its newfound consciousness suddenly alert and defensive. Through the windows, she could see the late afternoon shadows lengthening across Sorrow Hill, but there was an unnatural quality to the darkness gathering there. Maria moved closer, her face tight with concern. "Elena, what is it? What are you feeling?" Before Elena could answer, the house itself provided the response. The walls seemed to pulse with a low, warning vibration, and suddenly Elena's awareness expanded beyond her physical senses. She could feel what the house felt, a presence moving up the hill toward them, something that radiated the same twisted hunger the Victorian had once harbored, but magnified 100-fold. "It's the other houses," Elena breathed, understanding flooding through her with terrible clarity, the other places in Millbrook where tragedy left its mark. They felt what happened here today, they felt the healing, and they want it for themselves. David stepped to the window, his face pale as he peered through the gathering dusk. "Elena, there are people coming up the hill, a lot of them. But they're moving strangely, like they're not entirely in control of themselves." Elena struggled to her feet, her daughter's agitation making her own movements clumsy. Through the house's expanded awareness, she could sense the approaching crowd, dozens of Millbrook residents, drawn by forces they couldn't understand toward the source of the healing power they'd unconsciously craved for generations. But behind their confused human consciousness, she felt something else, the hungry presence of every cursed location in the town, using these innocent people as vessels to reach her daughter. "This is what I was afraid of," Elena said, her voice tight with realization. "The house was never the only damaged place here. Millbrook has been collecting spiritual wounds for over a century. When our daughter healed this Victorian, she sent out a signal to every other broken sanctuary in town. And they all want what this house now has." The baby's movements became so intense that Elena had to brace herself against the chair. She could feel her daughter's power building in response to the approaching threat, but it was raw, untrained, dangerous in its intensity. The child was preparing to defend herself and her family the only way she knew how, by attempting to heal everything at once. "She's going to try to fix them all," Elena gasped, understanding the magnitude of the disaster about to unfold. All the damaged places at the same time. It'll kill her. The power required, the spiritual strain. "Then we stop her," Maria said fiercely. "How do we stop her?" But Elena knew it wasn't that simple. Through her connection to her daughter, she could feel the child's desperate need to heal, inherited from Michael's compassionate nature and amplified by supernatural ability. The approaching spiritual wounds called to every instinct the baby possessed. To stop her from responding would be like asking her to stop breathing. The crowd was at their front gate now, and Elena could see them through the window, ordinary neighbors and strangers alike, their faces blank with otherworldly compulsion. Mrs. Chen from next door walked among them, her usual brisk efficiency replaced by an eerie, gliding movement. The mail carrier stood beside a family Elena recognized from the grocery store, all of them united by the supernatural forces driving them forward. "Elena," David's voice was steady despite the impossible situation, "what do you need from us? How do we help?" Elena felt everything Michael had taught her about trauma and healing crystallize into understanding. The wounded places couldn't be healed by force or overwhelming power. That was what had corrupted the Victorian in the first place, the desperate attempt to cure grief through possession rather than processing. Her daughter's gift was extraordinary, but it needed to be channeled with wisdom, not just unleashed. "We don't fight them," Elena said, moving toward the stairs despite her ungainly condition. "We teach them, all of them, the people and the places controlling them. We show them how healing actually works." She could feel Maria and David's confusion, but there wasn't time to explain. The crowd had reached the front door, and Elena could sense the spiritual pressure building like water behind a dam. In moments, that pressure would either find a controlled outlet or burst through in a catastrophic flood that would consume everyone within miles. Elena's daughter kicked sharply, and suddenly Elena understood what the baby needed, not to be shielded from the approaching crisis, but to face it with the support and wisdom she lacked. This was the final test, not just of the child's power, but of Elena's ability to guide that power with the love and understanding Michael would have provided. Everything they'd learned, everything they'd survived, had led to this moment of ultimate choice. The front door burst open without anyone touching it, and the possessed crowd poured into Elena's foyer like a supernatural tide. Their eyes were vacant, reflecting not human consciousness, but the desperate hunger of every cursed location in Millbrook. The old cemetery where children's graves wept black tears, the abandoned mill where workers' screams still echoed, the funeral home where grief had curdled into something malevolent. Elena felt her daughter's power surge in response, raw and overwhelming. The baby was preparing to heal them all at once, to pour herself out like molten gold until there was nothing left. The spiritual pressure building in Elena's belly was excruciating, not physical pain, but the agony of witnessing her child prepare to sacrifice herself for strangers. "No," Elena whispered, placing both hands on her stomach. "Not like this." She descended the stairs slowly, each step deliberate despite her ungainly condition. Behind her, she could hear Maria's sharp intake of breath and David's muttered prayer, but her focus was entirely on the crowd below. Mrs. Chen stood in the front rank, her weathered face blank as the abandoned cemetery spoke through her lips in a voice like rustling leaves. "Give us what you gave the house. Give us peace." The funeral home's hunger emerged through the mail carrier's throat. "Honey, sweet and desperate, we have served this town's sorrow for so long. We deserve healing too." The mill's rage poured from a young father Elena, recognized from school board meetings, his voice now harsh as grinding stone. "Why should one house be saved when we all suffer?" Elena reached the bottom of the stairs and stood before them, her daughter thrashing frantically inside her as waves of supernatural need crashed against them both. The baby wanted to help. Elena could feel that pure, inherited compassion burning through her like wildfire. But Elena also felt the terrible truth. If her daughter tried to heal every wounded place in Millbrook simultaneously, the effort would consume her entirely. "I know what you want," Elena said, her voice cutting through the cacophony of borrowed voices. "You want what this house found: peace, healing, the ability to serve love instead of feeding on pain. But you're asking for it the wrong way." The vacant stares fixed on her with predatory intensity. Through their human vessels she could feel the accumulated anguish of generations, every tragedy that had soaked into Millbrook soil, every grief that had twisted places meant for sanctuary into prisons of perpetual suffering. "You can't take healing," Elena continued, stepping closer despite every instinct screaming at her to retreat. "That's what made you sick in the first place. Trying to possess what you needed instead of learning to receive it." Her daughter's movements became so violent that Elena doubled over, gasping. The baby was reaching out with her power toward every damaged soul in the room, preparing to pour herself out in one catastrophic act of healing. Elena could feel the golden warmth building in her chest, her daughter's gift preparing to explode outward like a star-going supernova. "Elena!" Maria's voice was sharp with panic. "Whatever you're doing, do it faster." But Elena knew that rushing would destroy everything. She forced herself to breathe, to think like Michael would have thought. These places weren't evil. They were traumatized. They'd been feeding on pain for so long they'd forgotten how to process it, how to let it flow through them and transform into wisdom instead of festering into hunger. "You want to know how this house healed?" Elena asked, her voice growing stronger as understanding crystallized. It learned to let go. It stopped trying to hold on to the pain and started allowing love to flow through it instead. She placed her hands on her belly and felt her daughter's frantic energy beginning to focus. "My baby isn't going to heal you by force. She's going to teach you how to heal yourselves." The possessed crowd pressed closer, their borrowed voices rising in a desperate chorus. But Elena stood her ground, channeling every lesson Michael had taught her about trauma and recovery, every truth she'd learned about the difference between possession and healing. "The house didn't get better because we gave it new pain to feed on," Elena said, her voice carrying throughout the foyer. "It got better because it finally found the courage to feel its old pain completely and then let that pain transform into something else." Her daughter's power shifted, no longer building toward explosive release but flowing in controlled currents. Elena felt the baby's supernatural awareness reaching out to touch each possessed person gently, not to overwhelm their spiritual wounds, but to show them a different way of carrying pain. "This is how it works," Elena whispered, her daughter's gift flowing through her words. "This is how healing actually happens." The crowd wavered, their vacant expressions flickering as the places controlling them began to feel something they'd forgotten existed, hope that didn't require consuming others to sustain itself. Elena's water broke. The warm fluid running down Elena's legs should have been a moment of pure anticipation, the natural herald of her daughter's arrival. Instead, it felt like a countdown to catastrophe. The baby's power, already building to dangerous levels, suddenly intensified tenfold. Elena could feel her daughter responding to the imminent birth with supernatural panic, her gift preparing to explode outward the moment she drew her first breath. "It's happening," Elena gasped, doubling over as the first contraction hit. But this wasn't just physical labor. It was a spiritual crisis unfolding in real time. Through her connection to her daughter, Elena could sense the baby's terror at leaving the protective warmth of the womb for a world saturated with so much pain. The possessed crowd surged forward, sensing vulnerability. But as they moved, Elena felt something shift in the house around them. The Victorian's consciousness, no longer twisted by its own hunger, recognized the threat to the child who had saved it. The walls began to pulse with protective energy, and suddenly Elena understood what was about to happen. "No," she whispered, her hands clutching her belly as another contraction struck. "You can't protect her by becoming what you used to be." She could feel the house's love for her daughter warring with its ancient instincts. It wanted to shield the baby by consuming the approaching threats, by feeding on their spiritual wounds until they were too weak to pose danger. The old hunger was reasserting itself, disguised as devotion. Elena forced herself upright despite the labor pains racking her body. "Maria, David, I need you to get everyone away from the house. Now." "Elena, you can't give birth standing in the foyer while fighting supernatural forces," Maria protested, moving to support her. "I don't have a choice." Another contraction hit, and Elena felt her daughter's power spike in response. The baby was preparing to be born into battle, her gift coiled like a loaded weapon. If she comes into the world surrounded by all this spiritual pain, she'll try to fix everything at once. It will kill her. The truth crystallized with painful clarity. Elena could save her daughter, or she could save the possessed townspeople and their cursed locations, but she couldn't do both. The baby's power was extraordinary but finite. If Elena allowed her to attempt healing every wounded place in Millbrook during the vulnerable moments of birth, the effort would consume the child completely. "There has to be another way," David said desperately, but Elena could see in his eyes that he understood the mathematics of sacrifice as clearly as she did. Elena felt the house's consciousness pressing against her mind, offering its own solution. It could consume the approaching threats, return to its old nature just long enough to protect the birth. The Victorian was willing to sacrifice its hard-won healing to save her daughter, but Elena knew that choice would doom them all. A house that fed on pain to protect love would inevitably corrupt that love into possession. "I won't let either of you become monsters for my sake," Elena whispered, addressing both her daughter and the house. Another contraction struck, stronger than the last, and she felt the baby's power building toward critical mass. The possessed townspeople were almost close enough to touch now, their borrowed voices pleading for healing in a dozen different tones. Behind their human faces, Elena could sense the spiritual wounds that had tormented Millbrook for generations, all the places where love had curdled into hunger, where sanctuary had become prison. Elena made her choice. "Baby," she whispered, her hands moving in gentle circles over her belly, "I know you want to help them. I know you inherited your father's need to heal others, and I love that about you. But sometimes the greatest act of love is knowing when not to give everything away." She could feel her daughter's confusion, the child's supernatural awareness struggling to understand why they shouldn't heal every wound within reach. Elena poured her love into that connection, showing her daughter what Michael had taught her about the difference between helping and enabling, between healing and codependency. "We're going to help them," Elena continued, her voice steady despite another contraction, "but we're going to do it the right way. We're going to teach them to heal themselves one at a time, over years if necessary, and we're going to protect ourselves while we do it." The baby's frantic energy began to settle, responding to Elena's calm certainty. But Elena could feel the cost of that choice, the possessed crowd pressing closer, their need growing more desperate, the house's protective instincts threatening to override its newfound wisdom. Elena looked around the foyer that had become her sanctuary, at the friends who had chosen to stand with her, at the spiritual battlefield her daughter was about to be born into. She understood now what the real sacrifice would be, not her daughter's life or the house's redemption, but Elena's own illusion that she could save everyone. Some wounds would have to wait, some pain would have to be endured a little longer, and Elena would have to live with being the woman who chose her child's safety over the town's immediate healing. The next contraction was the strongest yet, and Elena knew there was no more time for preparation. The contraction passed through Elena like thunder, and in its wake came something unexpected: silence. Not the absence of sound, but the profound quiet that follows a great decision being made. Her daughter's frantic energy settled into something deeper, not retreat, but purposeful restraint. "David," Elena said, her voice remarkably steady, "help me to the couch. Maria, can you get the emergency kit from the kitchen?" As they moved her carefully across the foyer, Elena watched the possessed crowd through the window. They'd stopped advancing, their vacant faces turned toward the house with expressions of confusion. The spiritual wounds controlling them seemed to be processing what they had witnessed, a healing power that chose wisdom over raw force, boundaries over boundless giving. "They're not leaving," David observed, settling Elena onto the cushions. "No," Elena agreed, breathing through another contraction. "But they're not attacking either. They're learning." Through her connection to her daughter, Elena could feel the baby's power flowing in controlled currents now, no longer building toward explosive release. Instead, the child was doing exactly what Elena had taught her, offering guidance rather than overwhelming intervention. Tiny pulses of healing energy reached out to touch the possessed townspeople, not to cure them instantly, but to show them what healing could feel like when freely received, rather than desperately taken. Mrs. Chen blinked first, her weathered features flickering between the cemetery's hungry emptiness and her own confused awareness. "Elena?" Her voice was her own again, thin and frightened. "What am I doing here? I was in my garden, and then—" The mail carrier shook his head as if waking from a dream, the mill's rage sliding away from his expression like water. One by one, the possessed residents of Millbrook began to reclaim themselves, their human consciousness reasserting control as the spiritual wounds that had been using them learned to loosen their grip. "It's working," Maria breathed, returning with clean towels and the emergency birthing kit Elena had prepared weeks ago. "Your daughter, she's teaching them to let go." Elena nodded, then gasped as another contraction hit. This one felt different, not just the rhythmic tightening of labor, but the sensation of her daughter preparing to transition from one world to another. The baby's power was stabilizing, finding its proper boundaries as she approached birth. The Victorian house pulsed around them with warm approval. Elena could feel its consciousness wrapping protectively around the scene, no longer driven by possessive hunger but by the quiet satisfaction of shelter being used for its intended purpose. The walls seemed to exhale peace, and the gas lamps flickered with gentle welcome. "The curse is breaking," Elena realized aloud. "Not just here, but all over Millbrook. She's showing every wounded place how to transform their pain into wisdom instead of feeding on it endlessly." Through the window, she could see the effects spreading across the town. The old cemetery's perpetual mist was beginning to clear, revealing headstones that no longer wept black tears. The abandoned mill's oppressive darkness was lightening, its stone walls remembering their original purpose of providing sustenance rather than consuming hope. Even the funeral home's windows, which had been dark for decades, began to glow with soft, natural light. "Elena, you need to focus on the birth now," Maria said gently, checking her progress. "Your daughter has done the hardest part. She's chosen balance over sacrifice. Now she needs to actually be born." Elena felt the truth in those words. Her daughter's spiritual crisis was resolving itself as the child learned to wield her gift with wisdom rather than abandon. The baby was ready to enter a world where healing happened gradually, sustainably, with love rather than desperation as its foundation. The townspeople were dispersing now, helping each other walk down the hill with the careful movements of people recovering from a profound disorientation. Elena could hear them murmuring to each other in voices full of confusion but free of supernatural compulsion. They would remember this night as something like a shared dream, a collective experience of spiritual possibility that would influence their lives in subtle but lasting ways. "Mrs. Vasquez?" Mrs. Chen appeared at the window, her expression clear and concerned. "Are you all right? Is there anything we can do to help?" The offer was purely human, no supernatural need driving it, just one neighbor's genuine care for another. Elena felt tears spring to her eyes as she realized what her daughter had accomplished. The cycle of spiritual consumption that had plagued Millbrook for generations was finally broken, replaced by the possibility of authentic connection. "Thank you," Elena called back through the window. "But we're okay now. We're going to be just fine." Another contraction built and peaked, and Elena felt her daughter gathering herself for the final transition. The baby's power had found its proper expression, not overwhelming force, but gentle, consistent guidance. She would be born into a world still touched by pain, but no longer consumed by it. The house settled around them with deep contentment, its long nightmare finally over. In the warm glow of the gas lamps, Elena prepared to meet the daughter who had already proven herself wise enough to choose love over sacrifice. The first cry that filled the Victorian's foyer was purely human, no supernatural resonance, no otherworldly power crackling through the air, just the healthy, indignant wail of a newborn baby discovering breath. Elena laughed through her exhausted tears as Maria placed the squirming infant on her chest, this daughter who had already saved a town before taking her first breath. "Hello, Sophia," Elena whispered, the name coming to her with perfect certainty. Wisdom. That's what her daughter had shown, the wisdom to heal without destroying herself in the process. Sophia's eyes opened, dark and alert, and Elena felt the familiar tingle of her daughter's gift. But it was different now. Controlled, purposeful, no longer the wild torrent of power that had threatened to consume everything in its path. The baby's supernatural awareness reached out gently, touching Elena's exhausted spirit with the softest brush of healing warmth before settling into contented quiet. "She's beautiful," David said softly, his earlier terror replaced by wonder. "And look, the house." Elena followed his gaze around the foyer. The Victorian's transformation was complete, but subtle. The walls glowed with warm contentment rather than desperate hunger. The gas lamps flickered steadily, casting dancing shadows that spoke of life rather than haunting. Even the air felt different, peaceful rather than charged with supernatural tension. It knows its home now, Elena realized. Not a trap or a feeding ground, just a house where love lives. Over the following days, as Elena recovered and Sophia grew stronger, the changes in Millbrook became impossible to ignore. Mrs. Chen arrived each morning with fresh vegetables from her garden, staying to chat over coffee about everything except the strange night they'd all shared. Her visits felt natural, neighborly, the genuine connection of people choosing to care for one another. The cemetery on the hill began hosting its first funeral in 30 years, families finally able to lay their loved ones to rest without fear of spiritual consumption. Elena watched from her window as the Hendersons buried their grandfather with tears, but not the desperate grief that had characterized Millbrook's relationship with death for generations. The old graveyard had remembered how to offer comfort instead of feeding on sorrow. "The mill's been sold," Maria announced during one of her visits, Sophia sleeping peacefully in her arms. "A young couple from Portland wants to turn it into artist studios. They say the space feels inspiring now, full of potential instead of despair." Elena smiled, nursing her tea as afternoon light streamed through windows that no longer needed to be boarded against supernatural threats. Michael would have loved that. He always said buildings have souls, that they remember what they're used for. The mention of her husband's name still brought pain, but it was clean pain now, grief that could be felt fully and then released rather than the consuming anguish that had driven her to this house months ago. Elena had changed in ways that went deeper than becoming a mother. She had learned the difference between sacrifice and service, between giving everything and giving wisely. "I've been thinking about going back to work," she told Maria, surprising herself with the admission. "Part-time, when Sophia's older. The library could use someone who understands that some stories are more than fiction." Maria raised an eyebrow. "Stories about haunted houses and magical babies?" "Stories about healing," Elena corrected. "About places and people learning to transform their pain into wisdom. Millbrook's going to need that kind of guidance as more families discover they can move here without fearing for their souls." It was true. The town was slowly coming back to life as word spread that the supernatural predation had ended. Young families were buying the abandoned houses, drawn by affordable prices and the inexplicable sense of peace that now permeated the rain-soaked streets. Elena had become an unofficial advisor to newcomers, helping them understand their properties' histories without fear. That evening, as Elena sat in the restored nursery watching Sophia sleep, she felt the house's consciousness settling around them like a gentle embrace. The Victorian no longer demanded payment for its magic. It had learned to give freely to shelter without possessing. The relationship between house and inhabitant had transformed into genuine partnership. "We did it," Elena whispered to the sleeping baby. "We found a way to heal without losing ourselves." Sophia stirred in her crib, one tiny hand reaching toward the mobile David had hung above her head. As her fingers moved, the carved wooden animals began to turn in a breeze that came from nowhere, casting dancing shadows on walls that had once wept blood but now glowed with simple contentment. Elena settled back in her chair, watching her daughter discover the world with supernatural senses trained toward wisdom rather than sacrifice. Outside, rain pattered gently against windows that welcomed the sound instead of hiding from it. The house held them both with the patient love of shelter that had remembered its purpose, and Elena finally understood what home meant, not a place that demanded everything, but one that offered exactly what was needed, when it was needed, for as long as love chose to dwell within its walls. The new beginning. 3 months later, Elena woke not to Sophia's cries, but to the sound of laughter drifting through her bedroom window. She padded to the glass, her daughter balanced comfortably on her hip, and looked down at the sight that had become wonderfully routine. Children playing in what had once been the cursed cemetery, their voices bright with joy as they chased each other between headstones that now served as gentle reminders of lives well lived, rather than monuments to despair. The Henderson family had organized a community picnic among the graves, transforming the hilltop into a place where the living and the dead could coexist peacefully. Elena watched Mrs. Chen spread a blanket beside her late husband's headstone, unpacking sandwiches while she chatted with him about their granddaughter's first steps. There was no supernatural communication happening, just the natural human need to maintain connection with those we've loved and lost. "Look at that, sweet girl," Elena murmured to Sophia, who was tracking the movement of butterflies with eyes that saw more than most but no longer tried to heal everything they witnessed. That's what healthy grief looks like. The transformation of Millbrook had happened gradually, naturally, the way real healing always did. The mill now buzzed with creative energy as artists discovered that spaces could hold inspiration instead of anguish. The old funeral home had reopened under new management, serving families with compassion rather than feeding on their sorrow. Even the Victorian houses scattered throughout the town had remembered their original purpose, offering shelter and beauty instead of spiritual imprisonment. Elena's own house had become something unprecedented, a supernatural space that existed in perfect balance. The gas lamps still flickered with otherworldly awareness, but they illuminated rather than haunted. The walls still held memory, but they whispered stories of love and growth instead of screaming with accumulated pain. The foundation that had once cracked under the weight of spiritual hunger now stood solid, rooted in healthy soil. "Elena?" David's voice called from downstairs. "Your 10 o'clock is here?" She smiled, adjusting Sophia's blanket before heading to the library she established in what had once been the house's most troubled room. 3 mornings a week, Elena now offered consultations to people from all over Oregon who found themselves dealing with supposedly haunted properties. Word had spread quietly through certain circles that the woman in Millbrook knew how to help places remember their better natures. Today's client was a young father whose farmhouse had been manifesting the previous owner's rage in increasingly violent ways. Elena listened patiently as he described flying objects and voices that screamed in the night, Sophia sleeping peacefully in her carrier while supernatural disturbances were discussed with the same matter-of-fact tone others might use for plumbing problems. "The thing is," Elena told him gently, "the house isn't evil. It's wounded. Your daughter," she nodded toward the toddler playing with blocks in the corner, "she's probably trying to fix it, isn't she? You mentioned she talks to invisible people." The father's eyes widened with recognition. "Every night. She insists there's a sad man who needs help sleeping." Elena felt Sophia stir with empathetic awareness, but remain calmly present rather than reaching out to heal immediately. Her daughter was learning to offer guidance while respecting boundaries, to teach rather than simply fix. Children with gifts like hers want to help, but they need to learn that some healing takes time, Elena explained. "What I'm going to teach you is how to work with your house gradually, how to help it process the previous owner's pain without letting it consume your family's peace." By afternoon, Elena was back in the nursery, reading to Sophia from one of Michael's old poetry books. The words took on new meaning now, filtered through her experiences with supernatural love and the wisdom of choosing sustainable healing over dramatic sacrifice. She could feel Michael's presence sometimes, not haunting but blessing, his love woven into the foundation of the life she'd built. The doorbell chimed, and Elena heard Maria's familiar voice greeting David downstairs. Their friendship had deepened beyond crisis support into genuine companionship. Maria had taken a position at the reopened funeral home, helping families navigate grief with the insight she'd gained from witnessing Elena's journey. "How are my favorite girls?" Maria asked, settling into the rocking chair that had appeared in the nursery one morning, as if the house had decided the space needed it. Growing, Elena replied, and meant it in every sense. Sophia was developing normally, but with the quiet confidence of a child who understood her own power and its proper limits. Elena herself continued to discover new depths of strength, no longer the grief-stricken widow who'd bought a dollar house in desperation, but a woman who'd learned to transform pain into wisdom. Outside, the rain began its familiar evening pattern, droplets tapping against windows that welcomed the sound. The Victorians settled around them with the deep contentment of a house fulfilling its true purpose. Sophia reached toward the dancing shadows cast by gaslight, her tiny fingers grasping not for magic, but for the simple wonder of light and movement. Elena understood now that some stories don't end with dramatic resolution, but with the quiet joy of continuing to begin day after day in a place where love has learned to dwell without demanding sacrifice. They were home,